Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I'm Mary Wilde, and Alan Fink and I are managing or attempting to manage the programs that we bring to you. So tonight we have a program about song sparrows. Dr. Melissa Hughes has come out from College of Charleston to teach us a little bit more about how birds communicate and use their song. Melissa has studied animal behavior for years as a scientist. She did her undergraduate work at Bucknell in Pennsylvania and her graduate work at Duke University. She has studied a couple different varieties of organisms and working on this animal behavior, snapping shrimp, and then sparrows and some other types of birds. But tonight the topic is sparrows, and we look forward to learning a little bit more.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me out to your beautiful island. How much beautiful bird habitat do you have out here? It is really quite spectacular. Talking to a room of birders, or at least bird curious, I always feel a little like I have to almost be defensive with this little brown bird. I know that perhaps the song sparrow or sparrows in general might not be the bird that you first look for or are most interested in when you think about going out birding. But to me, when I go out birding, and I love going out birding, I love seeing how many species I can find. But also one of the things that I'm interested in is what these birds are actually doing. How do they live their lives? And so I just want to tell you some stories about how these birds live their lives, thinking not about diversity of bird species or even how birds as the ecology, what they forage on, these kinds of questions, but the diversity of how individual birds live their lives, make the decisions that they have to make to live their lives. That's really what motivates me to study these birds. And I would be remiss if I didn't highlight, this is not all my work by myself. In particular, my collaborator is Jeremy Hyman, who's up at Western Carolina University, big role in a lot of this. Bill Searcy and Steve Nowicki were mentors of mine in my graduate and postgraduate training, and they were parts of all of this. And Jen Scales, who was a graduate of the College of Charleston's Master's in Environmental Studies, also contributed to the work I'm going to be talking about today. And so when I'm saying thinking about birds as individuals, making the individual decisions they have to make in their lives, just like you make individual decisions, here's some of the questions that I'm going to be thinking about. There are a few of the questions. Any aspect of how these birds make decisions in their lives, fair game as far as I'm interested, my interest and yours if you have questions. But the things that I thought I'd focus on here, because they've really been central themes in a lot of my work, are first of all, the questions that I'm going to put up here. And first of all, why do birds sing? We're so used to using song to identify individuals, but again, or excuse me, to identify species. But I'm interested in what's in it for the bird. What is the bird trying to accomplish when they sing? And why is that male singing differently than that male? Individual decisions about what to sing. What is that song doing for them? And that really leads me to questions about how these birds are making particular social decisions in their lives. How do they decide how to defend their territories, when to fight, when to back down, and how do they choose who to mate with? Pretty important life decisions. And those questions led to a whole nother set of questions that maybe you're not expecting. And that's this question about bird personalities. Now, if I were to ask you, how many of you think that non-human animals like song sparrows or cats or dogs, how many think that they have personalities? Cool. How many of you thought that scientists thought that cats and dogs and song sparrows had personalities? And there's this sense that we're all like, they're a bunch of automatons and they don't have personality. But in fact, people in my business, we've been studying personality in animals for a while, and asking questions like, well, what's up with that? How do different personalities of song sparrows, in this case, how do they navigate their lives? How do they differ in personality? What does that mean for them? And so these are the kinds of questions that I'm thinking about talking about today. And if we get sidetracked, you have questions, please interrupt me. I'm not married to this. We can jump around, but here's the sort of flow of what I thought it might be interesting to talk about. Now, song sparrows are a bird that you might see here but probably only in the winter. We do get them in pretty large numbers wintering, and they might stick around if they're a first-year bird through the summer because they're not feeling up to the whole migrating and starting their life anew task yet. But for the most part, these birds are found more north of where we are here. And so this is just from a field guide. If you're used to reading field guides, the blue is winter habitat, purple is year-round, and pink is breeding habitat. I work on them right up here, just south of Lake Erie, in this area right on the Pennsylvania-Ohio border. That's Lake Pymatuning, if anyone's been up in that area. It's actually a lake formed by a WPA project in the 1940s. There's a dam down here, and the lake, the marshy area kind of continues down on the other side of that horseshoe. And that's relevant because that's pretty much where I work. If you follow the marshy area down there, this is all marsh. And there's a little spot right there that you might not be able to see, but if we zoom in, that's the shape that I'll show you a few times. That's my study site. And it's not an island, but it's bounded on two sides by these narrow isthmuses. And then water on the rest. And so it's not a discrete island, but it is a discrete population, a discrete neighborhood, if you will, of song sparrows. And so it provided me with boundaries. Song sparrows are an edge species. They like edge. So if you look at this satellite photo, every place where darker color meets lighter color, song sparrows live there. They live everywhere. There's some kind of edge. And so to study them, I needed a sort of a place that was sort of bounded, where I felt like this is the neighborhood I'm going to study. So this here is the neighborhood. I'll be telling you about the lives of the birds in that neighborhood, located just a wee bit south of Lake Erie. And so what do I do when I study them? The shorthand is that I'm eavesdropping on their lives in every way that I can. It's like a song sparrow soap opera, and I'm trying to find out how it works in that neighborhood. To do that, here's what I do. First, I capture all the adults that I can. I do this using either mist nets, a bit of a mist net there, or seed baited traps. Catch all the adults, put bands on them, both metal bands that the birds cannot remove and have unique numbers. This is issued by the Fish and Wildlife. And so if I recapture the bird, I can definitely get the unique number off of it, and I can identify that bird. But I want to be able to identify them without recapturing them, so they all also get a unique combination of these color bands or color anklets, if you will. So I know them as, for example, this is orange, green Fish and Wildlife. Their color bands become their names. They can get those color bands off. Some of them are better at it than others. So some of these birds have to be recaptured and rebanded as necessary. Take a bunch of measurements. I take these mug shots. I won't have a chance today to talk about that, but we can talk about plumage if you want to also. We take blood samples from the birds also. And then we just spy on them. I follow them around. I see what they're up to. I see with the boundaries of their territory. I see who they're fighting with, who they're hanging out with, who they seem to be mating with. And we do some experiments that I'll talk about where I'm putting speakers on their territories and playing song back to them so I can initiate a conversation and see what they're saying. And then I also, as I can, find the babies. Now, this is really hard because the nests are meant to be hidden. We'll talk more about that. But we spend a lot of time looking for nests. When we find the babies, when they're about 6 days old, the leg is large enough that I can put that metal band on so I can recognize them if they return. We take blood samples from them as well and take some measurements. And so this is what my lab looks like in the field. It's just a pile of stuff that I'm hauling around and then dumping out and doing various things with the birds. Now, while I'm doing all that, here's what the bird's doing. And so this is the life of a song sparrow in northwestern Pennsylvania in a bit of a nutshell. And we'll start in winter or early spring. So this is close enough to Lake Erie that they'll get lake effect snow. They'll get feet of snow up there. So we do have birds that overwinter nearby, but it's not an easy life. By March-ish, depending on the year, the snow will be starting to melt. There'll just be a few inches of snow, and I'll start finding birds back on territory. So this means the males primarily are showing back up and starting to set up their territories again. And by April, the females are showing up too. And again, the females might have still been in the area, or maybe they migrated, but they're starting to come back to the territories now and deciding where they're going to live with what male they're going to live. And then the next several months, and I have these pictures, you kind of see the habitat changing. The next several months are a series of working really hard at nesting. This is hard work. So as early as late April, they'll start building nests. So females build the nests. It takes 4 or 5 days to build a nest. And then the females will lay the eggs. It's an egg a day, maximum of 5 eggs. So in 5 more days, or fewer, if you lay fewer than eggs, you have your eggs laid. And then the female does the incubation, the thermoregulation of the nest. Takes about 12 to 13 days of incubation before the nestlings hatch. Assuming they don't get eaten, about 40% of the nests that are laid are eaten by predators before they hatch. And if that happens, the female just starts over again and we start the process over. But if the eggs do hatch, then we have a few days where a couple of days where they really can't thermoregulate yet. The babies are born completely helpless. The female will continue thermoregulating them at that point, and the male will start feeding. After the babies, assuming they live, are 2 or 3 days old, they can thermoregulate a little bit. And they're also much hungrier by then because they're growing. So both male and female are bringing food at that point. By between 8 and 10 days of age, and this is remarkable, I need a time-lapse video, they will hatch out of the egg being, a tiny, tiny little thing. Sparrow eggs are maybe a centimeter tip to tip. They're tiny. They will be skeletally a full-grown bird by the time they're 9 or 10 days old. They will have finished their growth. It's like you check the nest every day, you can see them getting bigger. They grow remarkably fast. And they have to grow fast because living in the nest is very dangerous. So remember I said that 40% of the egg nests would get depredated. It's closer to 60% of the birds once they hatch. So if you are lucky enough to hatch, you have about a 40% chance of making it out of the nest, because predators hear the noise that you're making, see the parents coming and going from the nest, and they will find you and eat you. So it's a lot of work for the parents. This is an 8-day-old Song Sparrow. He looks a little bewildered, but he could actually leave the nest and survive if he had to. They do better if they make it to 10, yeah. Oh, heavens, everything. I used to say they feed the field. So snakes are a big one. We get lots of, rat snakes, garter snakes, any snake will happily eat a nest. Small mammals, anything weaselly. Chipmunks are terrible, terrible nest predators. We don't have a lot of gray squirrels, but they would be nest predators also. In this field site, we don't have a lot of gray squirrels. They would be nest predators. We don't have a lot of feral cats there. They would certainly be nest predators also. Some surprising things like white-tailed deer are amazing nest predators. You think of them, I know it disturbs me. It's like those Bambi teeth, but it's terrible. They're actually known to pluck birds out of mist nets, which is also horrifying. Just to imagine. I don't know why. Predation should be done by predators, right? Not by Bambi, but that's how it works. They will definitely, there's great video now of, people put cameras on nests to see what happens. And that's how we know what the nest predators are. And with the deer, it's like they're coming along munching and they're like, oh, nest. And they just plunk their head in there and eat all the babies and then go along their way. It's a protein snack, right? Protein's a limiting resource for a lot of animals. If you live on leaves and grass, protein is a very important component of your diet. They don't turn it down. So basically everything that can find them will eat them. So you leave the nest at 10 days of age, 8 to 10 days. 10 days is definitely a better situation. You're not fully independent. So at that point, both parents are feeding like crazy because now the two birds aren't the babies aren't all in the nest together, right? At least when the parents were feeding in the nest, they knew where to go. I go to the nest, I feed my babies there. But then they're come out of the nest like popcorn and they're in 5 different places now and the parents are trying to chase them down. 5 days a week, maybe 2 weeks of feeding the babies. The job shifts from mom to dad. Mom goes back and if there's time, starts another nest and dad does the feeding of all the babies until they're fully independent. and the process starts over. Of course, anytime that, eggs or babies get eaten, we just go back and start this whole process over again, right? So they're working really, really, really hard. And I probably implicit they're monogamous. I said male and female doing this, so they're monogamous with biparental care. But there's a little asterisk I should put up here. They engage in a lot of what in my field we kind of euphemistically call extra pair copulations. These are, as it suggests, they're not necessarily copulating with their pair mate. They can be copulating with individuals outside of the pair. Both the males and females do that. And so the actual parents of the birds in the nest may or may not be the parents that are taking care of them, which is why we do all the blood samples, because I have to do parentage analysis to determine what actually has happened in this sparrow soap opera. And it is as the world turns out there. I had another thing I was going to say, slipped my mind. It'll come back to me later, I'm sure. So there's a lot going on, right? Oh, I mean, this also means there's a two-step process. I'm thinking about the decisions they have to make. So far, we've had the decision of where to live, which is happening for both males and females. For males, it's where to live. For females, it's where and with whom am I going to raise these young. For both of them, with whom I raise the young may or may not be who am I actually mating with, right? So there's multiple decisions being built in here. Now, these babies, if they live to this stage, are going to disperse and try to find some place to live until winter comes. And if I go out there in really late summer, early fall, it's like these gangs of teenagers. There are these gangs of first-year birds flying around together. They know nothing. They're like eating completely inappropriate food. Maybe we eat berries. No, you're not a berry-eating bird. Fine. They don't know what they're doing. They're kind of blundering around in the habitat. And then winter starts to come, and both the adults and the first-year birds have to decide, am I going to try to overwinter? Am I going to migrate? For this species at this latitude, it is a facultative decision. Some birds migrate, some birds don't, and it seems to change from year to year. So they're making some kind of decision. Do I stick it out around here? And we have band recovery data that some do. Or do we migrate? And we have the band recovery data in the winter as far south as North Carolina. So they can, some of them go, some of them stay. That's another decision they have to make. Then they have to come back here and start the whole process over again. The median tenure time, how long they're on territory, is only 2 years. To be a 3-year-old bird, they can, 1 year to grow up, and then you can have your first year on territory when you're 2. But I've had birds as old as 7 or 8 years on territory, so 8 or 9 years old minimum. So that's the nutshell. But what if we try to take a closer look? How do they actually make these decisions? This is a complicated life they're living out there, these little birds. And they have to make decisions that are literally life and death and are going to change the course of their lives. How are they making these decisions? And you probably can't see it. I put a little song sparrow up there, and I made it like 5 times bigger than it would be in the wild. And it is not to size, but you'll have to trust me. There's a little sparrow right there. How do they make the decisions in their lives? This is a picture of my field site. There's a bird living there. This is his territory. How does he make decisions about what to do there? And what's the role of song? So studying song is really fun. How many of you all have some kind of musical training? Like you can read music on piano or fess up. I'm not going to ask you to sight read. You're familiar with the musical staff. You're like, is this a quiz? What is this? But you're familiar with the musical staff, right? You can picture a musical staff. Okay. These are sonograms. You read them exactly the same way you do a musical staff. So we'll play this in a second, and I'll try to do the bouncy birdie. Follow the birdie, follow the pointer. But if you think about that musical staff, frequency, which we perceive as pitch, is on this y-axis, right? So this is a low note, right? So you might expect, and then time is on the x. So it's frequency as you go up and time as you go across. So this is medium, low, right? And things that are happening far apart are slow tempo, and then close together are faster tempo. So you can start reading the sonograms or spectrograms the same way that you would read music. The key here is that if you can see it, it's there. It's a sound. So if it's there, if it looks different, it sounds different. I'm trying to say. If you see a difference, there is a difference in the sound. Now, birds have much better temporal resolution than we do. That means they can hear a lot more detail that happens quickly in time than we can. So a lot of this will go by a lot faster. Like you will not hear all the detail in the song. But I will play it for you and we'll see if we can do the bouncy birdie and follow along. Where is my... Oh, it's terrible. I didn't have my thing in the right place. Let's try this again. Yeah. So you can you can't hear all the detail, but you can hear the me. Yeah. Right. A lot more detail, but you can kind of get a sense. That's a Song Sparrow song. And these spectrograms, again, if you see something there, there's sound. The birds can hear that detail, even though we cannot. It goes by too fast for our ear. And we can take all kinds of complicated measurements on this and summarize the complexity of these sounds in a variety of ways. Now, song sparrows are what we call a repertoire species. Each male sings more than one song type. This is the repertoire of one male song sparrow in my population. He sings all of these songs. So we'll just look at some of these variations. Again, if it looks different, it sounds different. I'll play a few of these and you can see if you can hear it. This is the one I played previously. Right? Compare that in sound to, say, this one. Quite different sound. Or say, I don't know, this one. Yeah? Or we'll do one more. About. So if it looks different, it sounds different. They make a tremendous variety of sounds. This is one male song sparrow. Another male might sing, so this is 10 songs. The average in my population is actually 8. They can go from as few as 5 to as many as 14 or 15. Different song types, as different as what you're seeing here. And in my population, each male is going to sing a completely different set. So there's tremendous variation in the kinds of songs. It drives my students crazy. Like, how am I ever going to recognize Song Sparrow song if every male sings 10 different things? Good luck with that. There are ways we can talk about how you recognize it. There are patterns that are consistent across all Song Sparrow song, but tremendous variation within those patterns. So that's a lot, right? Like, why do all that? That's a lot of stuff. So why do they sing? And why do they sing all that stuff is really the question. What's it for? And I used to just say, why do birds sing? And I have to modify that now, importantly, because my question, I have to admit, is why do male birds sing? We didn't bother with that modification because until just 5-6 years ago, we would say, among songbirds in North America and Northern Europe, in the northern latitudes, if you hear song, it's almost always a male. Female singing is very, very rare and just limited to a few species. Well, it turns out that's largely because it was males studying them. It's females. These things happen. Now, females sing quite differently, but they sing probably just as much complexity. They don't do it from high up on perches, and they tend to do it more quietly. But because it was mostly males doing the studying and the male song was more obvious, those two factors together means that we've been studying male song for 100 years and female song for about 10. So I apologize in advance. Everything I'm going to tell you about the details here is going to be about male song. Now, if we're thinking about why does that male sing these songs, there's 2 main reasons. Across male birds that have been studied, the 2 main reasons that we find that they sing have to do for one or both of these functions, and that's to attract females and or to defend territories. Differs by species. Some it's more of one function, some it's more of the other, some it's both. But some combination of these is pretty common. And so if you want to understand why sing all of this, you have to ask, how is this good for either attracting females or defending your territory, right? How do you use your song in these ways? Now, attracting females, how can we ask females what they like? It turns out that is a fun question to ask in birds because you get a very direct answer. If you bring female, so most birds, ducks aside, most birds do not have any kind of copulatory organ, no penis-like organ in the males, which means for a copulation to occur, the female has to take on that posture. She usually vocalizes at the same time, but that's called a copulation solicitation posture. No copulation can occur if she doesn't do that. And it turns out in some species, if you get her in the hormonal condition that she would be in while she's laying eggs, which is when she's fertile, and then play her songs, if she likes the song, she will do that. Essentially, she will say, I would copulate with that. So we can very directly ask the female about her song preferences. So let's do that. Suppose we were to ask females, what do you like? And we literally do, we bring females into the lab, we play them songs, different comparisons, try this song versus that song, or this combination of songs versus that combination of songs. Which do you like better? And I don't want to show you a lot of graphs. I'm just going to give you the take homes. In song sparrows and in a lot of other species that have repertoires, she likes more. You play her a choice between 5 or 6. I like the male who sings 6. 6 or 10, I like the male who sings 10, right? Any combination, she likes the more, singing more of this. She also likes if those more are really different from each other. So 5 that are similar to each other we take a bunch of acoustic measures, 5 similar versus 5 different. She wants variety. She wants more and more different. That is who she would like to copulate with. This is Song Sparrows. I'm not making any judgment. She also likes songs that sound like they're from around here. Now, this is kind of a fun story, so I'll tell you a little bit more about this. When we first started studying birds in Pennsylvania, we were just starting our study in Pennsylvania. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't have any recordings of Pennsylvania birds because we were just starting. But we had colleagues in New York who had recorded birds for years. So we're like, oh, we'll just get some of those New York recordings. It was at the Millbrook, the lab. There's a lab in Millbrook, New York. And we had colleagues there. So it's like, oh, record some song sparrows, send us the tapes. This is old school, right? We had cassette tapes, Maxell tapes. It was about 500 kilometers away. That becomes important in a minute. And we played them for our birds, males and females, and they all hated it. The Pennsylvania birds, they were like, I don't know what that is, but it's not a song sparrow, whatever. That's really like, are you seriously? It's only 500 kilometers away. These birds migrate as far as North Carolina. They hear other stuff. What? So we did this experiment. One of my colleagues wanted to call it Zeno's paradox. New York is about 500 kilometers away. Our Pennsylvania site would be here. The halfway point, we recorded birds. We drove out then to the quarter point and recorded birds, and the 1/8 point and recorded birds, and the 1/16. We cut the distance in half, as you know, in half, each coming the next section in. To ask the question, where does local, non-local, where's that break, right? So we know that neither males or females like New York song. How do they feel about song from 270 kilometers away? How do they feel about 135 kilometers away? Where do they decide, okay, this is the same as local? So all of these comparisons are local song recorded from the same neighborhood as compared to song recorded at one of these locations. And females, we did it coming in this way, and females were starting to scare us, like how close are we going to get? Females discriminated against song recorded just 34 kilometers away. They didn't like it. The 17 kilometers away, they were like, fine. That is, the discrimination here is treating the same as local. But females did not like anything recorded from somewhere between, like 34 was fine, 68 was bad, everything out was bad. Very particular, they wanted what sounded local. Males, on the other hand, and I'll get to later how we ask males this question, males were much less discriminating. They didn't like New York song, but everything 270 in was just plain fine, right? So they were here, the line would be, anything above that line is a preference for local. The line is no distinguishing. And the only one they made a significant distinction was New York. So both males and females can tell local from non-local, but females are a lot more sensitive. They're drawing that line much closer in. This is what we call song dialects. song accents, maybe you want to think of it. We use the term dialect. It's a little different than human language dialect, but it comes from the same process. You sound different if you grow up, say, in South Carolina than if you grow up in New York, because you copy what you hear, right? We learn language by copying, and we copy what we hear around us. And it turns out that birds, songbirds like song sparrows, learn to sing by a process of imitation, very similar to the way that we learn speech. And they do this in their less than the first year of life, the first 9-10 months of life. They're going to copy everything they're going to sing their whole life. They have to copy in those first months. And so if you copy from birds around here, you're going to sound like you're from around here. If you copy from New York, you're going to sound like you're from New York. Now, why would that be? Why would you care? So the question we kind of wrestled with for a while was, okay, so we understand why a bird from New York might sound different from a bird in Pennsylvania, but why would a female care? Why would a male care? Why would females care more? And some of the work my colleagues was doing on what they thought was a completely different topic may provide an answer. They were looking at how well birds go through that learning process. Some birds learn really well. So you bring birds into the lab when they're babies, you play them song from cassette tapes, you know exactly what they heard, and then you measure what they sing. And it turns out some individuals are great learners, and some individuals are not so great learners. And they were studying that process of learning and why some might learn better than others. Well, one of the things we discovered related to that work was that females prefer song that is better learned. And so one possibility is that females are preferring local song because that New York song sounds like, man, you did not learn a thing, did you? Right? You were a terrible learner. That doesn't sound anything like around here. And so what we were measuring as a preference for local might actually be functionally a preference for birds that are better able to learn. All right. Could talk about attracting females forever, but let's think a little bit about using song and territory defense, just the other side of that coin. Birds also use song to defend their territories. How do they do that? Now, how do we ask that question? First of all, how can we ask? With females, it was pretty straightforward. I play you that song. If you like it, you do that posture. That's actually a fairly direct measure if you like it or not. Asking, is this a good song for defending a territory, can be a bit more complicated. So we go about that in two ways. The first, remember I got a little song sparrow up there, my little song sparrow. The first is an experiment where it's incredibly laborious. First of all, we try to very quietly capture and remove that male and put him in a cage somewhere, keep him happy for, can be as long as a day or two. So we remove that male and we replace him with a speaker where we control what gets played. Now, and these are creatively called male removal speaker replacement experiments. Essentially what we're doing is we're asking, can I defend the territory for you using your song? But we're going to do some manipulations. Now, they're incredibly laborious because ideally you want to remove two males simultaneously from the same area so you can do a comparison on the same day. You have to have recorded both males in advance, so you're using their song. If you use stranger song, everyone in the neighborhood's going to know what's going on Bob's territory. That's not Bob, right? So you got to record Bob and Joe. You've got to figure out what comparison you want to make. You got to remove them both very quietly at the same time in the morning, and then replace them with maybe Bob singing 5 song types and Joe singing 2 song types or something like that. It's incredibly laborious. And using this method, we have conclusively demonstrated that songs do defend a territory in song sparrows. Just the most basic experiment, song versus no song in the design that I just said, no song from Bob's territory, Joe's song coming out of Joe's territory. But it can take a day and a half before someone moves in. So there's just a very long time to wait. And it's a little perplexing why. We can come back to that because I know there are unterritorial males out there. And the neighbors are often the invader is a neighbor just saying, you know what, Joe's gone, I'm just going to take half his territory. But it takes them a long time to decide to do that. And what's going on there? I have some thoughts, but we got very frustrated with this experimental design. So we tried something different. This experiment is asking, how do songs defend the territory? We could also ask, what songs does a territory holder find threatening? And so we leave the territory holder there. The territorial male gets to stay. We put the speaker on his territory and we play song that simulates someone trying to intrude the territory. So we're not asking what's best in defense. We're asking, what do you as a territory holder find most threatening, right? Now, my colleagues did a really fun experiment. I wish I'd been part of this, although it was very long and laborious and they spent a lot of time lying on the grass. They wanted to know what measure, like, is this really, what can we measure that actually is showing that the territory holder is super pissed? Like, how do we know that he's threatened? And so what they did, they wanted to know what predicts whether he will attack or not. Like, that's a pissed off bird, a bird ready to attack. So they would put the speaker out there and they would have a stuffed song sparrow right next to it, but covered with a rag so that couldn't be seen. So they would play some song from the speaker, get the male to come in, measure the territory male's response, and then pull a string and reveal the song sparrow there. And then ask, you know, does the territory holder go, whoa, and run away? Or does he come in and attack? And then try to save the stuffed bird before it's torn to shreds, because these birds can be really vicious. And what they found is that how close you approach really strongly predicts attack. So birds that come and sit on the speaker, like they're just ready. Some birds dance around the speaker looking for, where's that bird? I want to kill it. They're going to attack. Birds that sit up in the tree and are like, you're in my territory, I will sing back, go away, please. They're not going to attack. So we often, in these experiments, we use closeness of approach to the speaker as a measure of how threatening, how much of an aggressive response did that song trigger in these birds. And so if we think about what females found important, that's this list here, more similar, more local. You might expect that males maybe are looking for the same things in song. You would be wrong, unfortunately. They don't care about similarity. They do care about more. More song types is more threatening than fewer, but they don't really care how similar they are. And they also, I showed you, don't really care as much about local. They care a little bit. They didn't like New York song, but they aren't nearly as sensitive to how local the song is. But they do care a lot about amplitude. And it turns out the most aggressive thing a bird can do, and this has been replicated in a lot of species now, the most aggressive thing a bird can do is sing at you softly. A bird that sings at you softly really wants you dead and may try to do that. They kind of puff up. They're very cute. They'll sing with their beaks. They're deadly cute, but they will sing with their beaks pressed shut and sing very, very soft and wave their wings. That actually correlates with attack too. But that soft singing is a highly aggressive signal. And it also turns out that they're very sensitive. They find more aggressive songs that are harder to sing. And in fact, the territory holder, when he's being aggressive, will modify his song to make it sound harder to sing as well. Now, what do I mean harder to sing? You bounce back to our sound, what? Sound spectrograms. You remember these rapidly repeated bits? Like all the songs I played you had bits that repeat really rapidly. Some go, right? They have these repeated bits, whereas others are like, little bit of bird physiology. To make a song, to make any frequency, they're actually making it with an organ that we don't have called the syrinx. It's at the junction of your bronchi down here. So that's where the song is being made. It's their version of the voice box. But the sound coming out of there has a bunch of overtones that they want to filter out. They make a pure tone song, one frequency per unit time. And to filter out the overtones, they essentially use their beak. If you're like an old school stereo person, you know, those dynamic filters that you could play with, they're doing their beak to do that. So to make a high frequency sound, the beak needs to be wide open. To make a low frequency sound, the beak needs to be fairly closed. So if you're going from very high to very low, your beak has to do this. And if you're doing it fast, there's a limit to how fast you can do that, right? If you're only going from mid-high to mid-low, you can do that a lot faster. But if you're going to go from very high to very low, your beak has to traverse a wide range, and doing that faster is more difficult. And we've got lots of biomechanic evidence and other kinds of evidence to support that. What we find in the field is that birds, when they're being very aggressive, maybe won't sing a lazy song like that, but will sing a song with a more difficult part like that. And they also will speed it up. So they will sing it a little harder to be a little more threatening. All right. Now, so they have songs and they use them to attract males and females and defend against males, use them to attract females and defend territories against other males. But I mentioned this personality stuff. And it was in these simulated territorial intrusions where we started scratching our heads about personality, because through these experiments, you're sticking speakers on birds' territories and playing song. Like, there is a bird in your territory singing. Are you going to do something about that? And quite clearly, the answer for a lot of birds was, maybe not. I'm like, well, what is up with you? How do you even defend a territory? I am here taking your territory. It was perplexing to us. So we thought we should study it. So how do you study personality? What is personality? What do you think? What do you mean when you say she has a really nice personality? Y'all are worse than my students. I'm not grading you. Come on. What do you mean? So something about the behavior, being very nice, but more than that, just this one time. They were nice to you once and they have a nice personality. No, it's consistent. Exactly. When we say personality, we mean there's something predictable about their behavior. She's really nice. That means she's going to be nice. I'm going to see her tomorrow. She'll be nice. Even when something bad happens, she's probably going to be nice. Whereas she has an aggressive personality, she's going to be a little pushy, whether things are going good or bad, right? There's something consistent about their behavior. The technical definition we use in non-human studies of personalities is consistent individual differences. Can I measure something consistently different between you and you and you and you and you in your behavior? And we can do this in aggression by the method that I just described. I play song in your territory. How close do you approach? And it turns out they're really consistent. They're consistent across the season. At first, we thought maybe some of these birds were just too busy, right? Maybe you're less aggressive when you're feeding, right? You got other stuff to do. But it turns out you're consistent throughout the season. Doesn't matter if you're looking for a female, have eggs, have nestlings. Some males are more aggressive than others. And they're consistent their whole dang lives. We've got birds that are 7 years old and their personality does not change. The biggest wobble is between year 1 and 2. And then after that, they're super consistent throughout their lives. Some birds are consistently aggressive. Some birds are consistently not. And I don't know what they're doing. And it turns out that's also clustered. If you go out in the field site in any given year, you'll have little clusters of aggressive birds and unaggressive birds. So there's good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods or something. There's like really aggressive neighborhoods and there's really less aggressive neighborhoods. And birds know about each other's personality. Yeah? So this is my colleague Jeremy's idea, and we did it together, and it was really fun. They're very sensitive. So I mean, this is a little tongue in cheek, but we categorize the birds as wimps and studs. Not in print, but we have done this. A stud is a very aggressive bird. A wimp is on the other end of the spectrum. And what we did was we found birds who had high levels of aggression, who had in that year at least one very aggressive neighbor and one very unaggressive neighbor. And we wanted to ask the question, do you know about the aggressive, do you know that this guy's a stud and that guy's a wimp? So what we did, if you think of that red line there as being the territory, we played A's song just inside the territory boundary, like trespassing. A is trespassing in your territory, just a little bit. And on another day, random order, we'd play the aggressive guy song just on his boundary, just inside. C's trespassing. Now, you'd expect if you're more worried about C, you might be more aggressive when C is played here than when A is played here. But there's a possible confound, maybe this side of the territory you just don't care about. So we also played a stranger song, a completely unknown bird song from that side. Do it all in a random order, different days. And it turns out they really do care. They are super aggressive to the stranger here and to the C song there, but they couldn't care less about A. He is not a threat. So they're very sensitive to each other and what each other's possible threat is. So this is kind of perplexing. They have these differences in aggression, and it's perplexing in a couple of different ways. Like, why? First of all, aggression is costly. Testosterone, this aggression is probably testosterone mediated. Testosterone is a terrible drug. It suppresses your immune system. It does all kinds of things. So there's a lifelong cost to having elevated testosterone. Plus, if you're engaged in lots of fights, you're probably attracting more predators. You're expending energy. So that's really costly. Why spend all that energy if it's not necessary? So why do we have these really highly aggressive males? And if you're saying to yourself, well, maybe it's necessary to hold a territory. Well, I mean, the territories are necessary, but those wimps are holding territories too, like with way low levels of aggression. And so how is that even possible? We know there are males without territories out there. Why aren't they just picking those wimps out? So it's kind of perplexing. And there's other questions like, well, maybe being a stud is better because it gets you a better territory. Or maybe there's other behaviors that are correlated with aggression, like none of our personalities are defined by one trait. And so maybe there's other aspects of this aggressive personality that would help us understand why everyone is on a stud, for example. Let's think about those. First, there's this question of, do studs get better territories? That seems kind of intuitive. Well, here's the problem. Is that a good territory or not? I don't know. Looks nice to me, but I'm not a song sparrow, right? And so we did a lot of head scratching, like how we could measure insect abundance or cover or all a bunch of things, but we have no idea if that matters to a song sparrow. So finally, we hit on an idea, and this turned into Jen Scales' thesis. How do we define territory quality? Well, by definition, a good territory is a territory that produces song sparrows. If it makes babies, it's a good territory. Now, you want whether it has made babies in the past, because you don't want to confound you being a good parent with you having a good territory. So we took all this historical data, 2000 through 2007 in this case, and we mapped where does success happen on the field site? And then we asked in 2008, did aggressiveness predict who got good or bad territories? We measure quality in two ways. First of all, did they live? I mentioned most of them do not because of high predators. Occasionally, very rarely, I'll have nestlings die in the nest that aren't eaten. Very rarely, there'll be other causes of death. 99.9% of the death out there is getting eaten. So death is a proxy, not surviving to leave the nest is a proxy for predation risk. So, and we use survival to 8 days old, because if they live to 8, they can get out of the nest, and some of them will get away from a predator. So did the nest live to 8 days or not? Is successful. And then we just map that on our field site. And if you kind of look, like there's little corners, like if you nest up here, man, those are always eaten. Do not go there. That's bad. That's just like a bad area. That's 8 years of data, and every nest up in that corner gets eaten. Whereas down here, like, yeah, that's better. That's like a better place to be a bird, man. Those nests are living down there historically. The other measure that we used is how many babies. The range is really 3 to 5. 5 is the max. And we know from data in other populations that females will lay more eggs if there are more resources. She's kind of planning ahead. Will there be resources to feed my young? So we're using clutch size as a measure of resource availability. And again, we plot the historic nests. The yellow dots are the 5. And again, up there, remember, that was a corner where they got eaten a lot, but there must be good resources because there's always 5 babies in the nest up there, really feeding the predators. Whereas down here, like that's only 4 nests in that area, and maybe more 5 over there. Statistically, both clutch size and success are clustered. There are clusters. It's not evenly distributed across the site. So then in 2008, we mapped out all the males' territories. We didn't include the returning males because they might have contributed nests to that success data. We just wanted new males coming in. What territories did they get as evaluated by past success? So if we look at these new males in their territories, we measured their aggression, and then we looked at their territory quality by these measures, and it turned out, yeah, more aggressive males got territories with higher historical clutch sizes, more resources. Unfortunately, there was no relationship to nest success, which implies that possibly they can assess resource abundance, something about the resource quality of the territory, but they can't predict predator risk. So kind of a mixed result to better territory. So these studs, they have territories with higher historic clutch sizes, but not historic fate. They also tend to have longer territory tenures, but this is a really, really noisy relationship. For 1 to 2, even into 3 years of tenure, there's no difference in that range between wimps and studs. There's Most of them are getting eaten by predators either way, so it doesn't matter how aggressive you are. But for the longer territory tenures, they are more likely to be the studs. In other words, being a stud doesn't guarantee you a long territory tenure, but it might be necessary to get one. Like, it's not the only factor, but only the studs end up with the really long tenures. All right. Is the aggression correlated with anything else that might be of interest to us then? And a common one is boldness. In a lot of species, more aggressive animals are more bold. How do we assess how bold you are? Here's an experiment that you too can do at home. In fact, there's a worldwide database of this metric if you'd like to play along, because it's become a very popular way of measuring boldness in a wide array of species, including a lot of birds. And that's flight initiation distance, or FID. Now, in this metric, it's as you've shown here, you play the predator. You have to get good at estimating distances, but in meters. You want to start within a certain range. You want to make sure you know your starting distance from the animal. And then you want to walk at a rate of about 1 meter per second. You got to practice that towards the animal. And you see how close you can get before it flies away. Measure how close you can get. Flight initiation distance. A bolder animal will let you get closer. Right? So is boldness correlated with aggression? And the answer is yeah. Ignore the different color, the open and closed circles here for a sec. So this is aggression. Remember, that's distance to speaker. So this is really aggressive and this is really wimpy that way, right? This is flight initiation distance. Here is really bold, right? You could practically reach out and touch the bird. And there's really kind of skittish, very shy. So here is your bold and aggressive birds. Here's your shy and unaggressive birds. You might imagine that the best thing to be would be really aggressive in territory defense, but really shy when a predator's around, and that just doesn't exist, right? And so boldness or aggression in territorial defense might come with a cost of being too bold around predators, not running away soon enough, and that might incur some other costs as well, possibly. It's two different colors there. It's all one line, but clearly there's this down here and that up there. It turns out the open circles are the population I've been talking about, and the closed circles are what we call our urban population, which is the small town of Linesville, which I think has fewer residents than y'all's town does. It's this very small town in Pennsylvania. But these urban birds, these town birds, are much more aggressive and much more bold than the rural birds. This also has been replicated now in a lot of species and in a lot of different locations. It's a common human impact on animal personality. Animals that live near us tend to be bolder because they have experience with us maybe, but that also goes along with them being more aggressive in their conspecific interactions. And people are starting to wonder about what that all means also. So territory defense, personality plays a role. You get better territory maybe in terms of resources, but not safer. Maybe longer tenure if you can avoid the predators. You are bolder, so you're probably taking more risks too if you're more aggressive. You do have some awareness of your neighbor's personality, and there's probably a lot more complexity going on there than we realize. And there's this urban-rural difference that possibly has implications outside of just understanding the life of a song sparrow. So this is really, I've just scratched the surface of a few of the decisions that these birds are making, right? We didn't talk about parental care. We didn't talk about when to stop caring for your babies and start the next nest, right? When do you give up on the babies? When do you disperse? Where do you disperse as a baby? When do you make this decision to migrate or not? How do you decide what territory to live on? What about those extra pair copulations? We've barely scratched the surface. My main point here is to help us, what I really hope I leave you with is to be thinking about birds not only in terms of the wonderful diversity of all of the many, many species of birds that you get to see, but think about them as individuals too, and the individual decisions that they are making as they go through their lives. There's so much interesting complexity to think about there. Thank you for your time. And happy to have any questions if anyone.
I know, that's what I'm gonna just make sure that people get a chance to ask a few questions. That was amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that's a really great question. And I'm not necessarily going to have a satisfactory answer other than to say possibly that we're looking at, oh, that was the wrong one. Yeah, that the range that we were looking at within 34 kilometers, right? So local was within 34 kilometers. It may be that I don't want to mate with someone that too close would be bad, but there's a lot of good within 34 kilometers, if that makes sense. There's a lot of birds within 34 kilometers that I'm not related to. Now, historically, we have thought that birds can't smell terribly well, right? We've all probably heard that the sense of smell in birds, other than like vultures and some seabirds, that birds and like songbirds don't have a great sense of smell. And it turns out that's not true. Many of them have really excellent senses of smell. That's the one I was looking for. And it's whatever. Many of them have great senses of smell, and they can smell how closely related they are. Is the take home that I should be getting to faster. There's a series of genes that are involved in vertebrate, including our immune system, called the MHC genes. They're involved, there's a whole bunch of these genes, and they're involved in self, non-self recognition. And many species of mammals and birds and fish now have been shown to have mate choice preferences for individuals with more different MHC, and based on smell. You might see birds, they do it, that they rumen, right? That preen gland, and they get that preen oil on their bill, and then they cover their feathers. There's a lot of volatile compounds in that preen oil, and that gives them a scent that maybe we don't always detect, but it means a lot to them. And probably when you see them doing that bill wipe and stuff, they're depositing some of that also. So I think that's I think that they definitely want to avoid inbreeding, but they have other mechanisms of doing it. They can smell within that 34 kilometers who they might be closely related to, but within that 34-kilometer circle, there's lots of unrelated birds. Oh, yeah, it totally varies a lot. But this room actually would be, at my field site, this would be a smallish territory. And this would probably be an average territory. We have some that are considerably bigger, but this would be about average. Yeah, so we use microsatellites for parentage, basically. We're looking at parentage. Or we would be. I have a heavy teaching load, so a lot of this they're in the freezer. They will get to that someday, but I have lots of blood in the freezer, and the goal is to do parentage. Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. It kind of depends. There's definitely variation. And there's a bit of they're up against the clock. For the coming of winter, exactly. So it sort of depends. If a nest fails early on, they're going to renest, right? If I have a nest that fails in June, I'm renesting. If I have a nest that fails in July, then it gets dicey. If I have a nest that fails in mid to late June, then some birds will renest and some seem to give up at that point. So there's some individual differences in whether they're willing to keep pushing that. Winter's coming soon. They also have to do some other things. I probably should have put this on here. Another thing that has to happen before they migrate or overwinter is they have to molt. So these are once a year molters, and they're going to molt when the breeding season is over. And that's a really expensive process, right? That's replacing, it's a full molt most years. Most birds, their feather coat weighs more than their skeleton. It's a lot of mass. And so they aren't going to start that process of molting until they close the door on the breeding. We're not going to do any more breeding. Now I can start the process of molting. And then I need to leave enough time to go through all that molt. And then I have to put on the weight that I need to make sure that I can migrate or overwinter. And so I think there's sort of a back calculating, like maybe if you're in really good shape, you think I can push through and try one more time. There's some variation in how long molt takes. You will make weaker feathers, but you can molt a little faster. And so they also can be a little elastic there. Like I'm going to push through one more attempt, try to molt really fast. Yeah. But there's decisions to make there. Yes. Oh yeah, and then so these are Pennsylvania birds, North Carolina birds. They can go much longer. Maybe don't have to worry as much about that trade-off. Yeah. Birds that live even further north. I mean, there's birds up in Newfoundland, right? And they've got an even shorter season. In Alaska, there's Alaska birds. Right? Yeah. Oh no. No, that's the extra pair copulations. And so they could have, so these birds are kind of on the low, they're not as, they don't do as many EPCs as some. Red-winged blackbirds, you know those guys out in the marsh? You could have 4 different fathers in that nest of 5 or 6 eggs, right? They are busy. These guys, it's more likely that somewhere between 20 and 30% of the eggs are fathered by somebody else across the whole population. So within one nest, maybe they're all the dad that's there, a couple of eggs in some nests. In this species, usually 99% of the time, the eggs, the mother taking care of the nest is the mother of the eggs. But in some songbirds, the females will sneak around and put eggs in other nests as well. So you can't even be sure if it's the moms. It could be 2 completely different ones. But generally they have to think about, I mean, the egg is going to come out with a shell, right? So it has to be fertilized pretty early in the process before the shell is laid down around the egg. And so generally speaking, in most songbirds, the copulation has to occur within a couple of days of making the egg. She can store sperm a short period of time, but not very long. So she's copulating several times a day while she's laying the eggs.
I need neither.
So I know, isn't it weird? So you would think, and in fact, my colleagues who did this study were really hoping that that bird with 10 was a better learner than the one that only had 5, for example. And it turns out that that wasn't so much the case. It's how well they copied the individual bits. So did this bird hear exactly this set of notes or something slightly different? And so when we talk about learning quality, it's the quality of copies of individual things. There doesn't seem to be effect on the number of things copied. And it also, from a mistake in an experiment, almost before I was born, the early days of this work, they played the wrong tape one day and they quickly figured it out and pulled the tape out. But they know from that mistake that birds learned songs that they only heard one time. And so we can't say definitively that more exposure doesn't make it more likely to learn, but it doesn't require a lot of exposure for them to learn. They can copy really quickly. So why do some copy 10 and some copy 5? Get back to something that you said earlier, they do copy, but they do a lot of improvisation too. And so they might copy, like this might be copied from something they heard, and this might have been copied from something else and they put it together. Or maybe this was copied from something they heard, and this was copied from something else. And this stuff, I have no idea where that came from. They made it up. And it's kind of interesting because if they don't have the opportunity to learn, they won't make that. If you raise birds and don't play them any Song Sparrow song, what they make looks nothing like you see up here. But if they hear Song Sparrow song, they seem to be able to invent other Song Sparrow song. It's like they learn the rules and then they can do some of this improvisation. So these guys are very selective, and they will generally only learn their own species. Again, the early work from the 1970s on these guys and a related species, the swamp sparrow, they tried these tricks where they would take notes from the swamp sparrow, but arrange them in a song sparrow-like way, and then you can trick the song sparrow into learning them. There's something about the patterning of the song. So they wouldn't really learn a mockingbird, but if you took a mockingbird and chopped it up to make it look kind of like this general pattern, which is like repeat something and then some unrepeated stuff and then repeat something, like that general pattern of repeat, non-repeat, repeat. If you kind of take other bird song and arrange it in a song sparrow-like way, they're more likely to learn it. Mockingbirds learn anything, but they don't tend to do long bits like that. Like, right? They do a little short bit. So mockingbirds will totally pick up chunks of Song Sparrow song. They don't tend to do full songs. We used to call mockingbirds where master's theses go to die, right? There's so many questions there, but yeah, they're Dr. Hughes. Thank you. Thank you.